as the world continues to face a global migration crisis, we have an obligation to step up and work alongside our provincial and territorial partner. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Kitchener Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm glad to be back again tonight, pressing on the need for a windfall profit tax on the oil and gas industry, the context for which begins with recognizing the extent of the climate crisis we are in. These are the words of the UN Secretary General, quote, "We are on a highway to climate hell with our foot on the accelerator. We are in the fight of our lives, and we are losing. Our planet is fast approaching tipping points that will make climate chaos irreversible." He goes on to say, "The global climate fight will be won or lost in this crucial decade on our watch." Now in Canada, we need to look no further than this past summer, where climate-fueled wildfires burned over 184,000 square kilometers of forest, more than double the previous record from 1995. It was 5% of our total forest cover across the country. Or we can look to 20 medical journals who just last week urged the World Health Organization to deem both the climate crisis and biodiversity loss as a global health emergency. Now, in the midst of this crisis, the industry most responsible for accelerating the climate crisis, well, they're making off like bandits. Their profits in 2022 alone, from the 5 biggest oil and gas companies alone, were $38 billion. And that's after they paid shareholders $29 billion in increased dividends and share repurchases. Now, how is this possible? Well, some, particularly in this place, will talk a lot about increases to the carbon tax. But let's return to the facts. In 2022, the carbon tax went up 2 cents per litre on the cost of gasoline. The profits of oil and gas companies, they went up 18 cents a litre. And so this isn't only about the worsening climate crisis and the gouging of the oil and gas industry, but it's also about how life is becoming less affordable for people in my community as those very same companies are worsening inflation. And so it's imperative on parliamentarians to step up and take reasonable measures. At the very least, the government has already introduced a windfall profit tax. They call it the Canada Recovery Dividend on banks and life insurance companies in the pandemic. With Motion 92, all we're putting forward is to say, now do oil and gas. It's supported by groups from Environmental Defence to the David Suzuki Foundation to Canadians for Tax Fairness. And last week, it's now been studied by the Parliamentary Budget Officer. A one-time 15% tax on profits above $1 billion would raise $4.2 billion, Mr. Speaker, all of which could directly go to funding the proven climate solutions we need that would make life more affordable for Canadians, like public transit, like retrofitting homes. The fall economic statement is due out in the coming weeks. My question for the Parliamentary Secretary is whether they are going to advocate for a windfall profit tax on the oil and gas industry to be included in it.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, between the unprecedented floods, wildfires and storms we have witnessed across the country this summer, there is no doubt that the impact of climate change on Canada are quite real and serious. Just as we know that climate change is real, the path forward is clear: to protect our planet and to build a stronger economy. We must endeavour to do even more when it comes to climate action. It's quite simple, Mr. Speaker. Canada cannot afford to miss the boat. We must act and move forward with a green economy. That's why in Budget 2023, we announced a historic investments in clean technology to ensure that Canada's economy can generate prosperous, middle-class jobs and more vibrant communities across the country. For example, we are implementing a set of clear and predictable investment tax credit, low-cost strategic financing, and targeted investment and programming when necessary to respond to the unique needs of the sector or projects of national economic significance. Mr. Speaker, when it comes to windfall tax, our government has been and remains committed to making sure everyone pays their fair share of taxes. We know that the program and services that Canadians rely on are dependent on a robust national tax base, and our action speaks for themselves. Since 2015, we pushed forward several measures to ensure that everyone pays their fair share. For example, we took action to close loopholes, to crack down on tax avoidance, and to ensure that the wealthiest pay for their fair share. We moved forward with a permanent increase of the corporate income tax by 1.5 percentage points on the largest, most profitable banks and insurance companies in Canada, and went ahead with the Canada Recovery Dividend of 15% on banks and insurance companies to help support Canada's broader economy. We also raising the alternative minimum tax rate from 15% to 20.5% and further limiting the access of use of tax preference. This measure will generate an estimated $3 billion in revenue over 5 years, starting with the 2024 tax year. Tens of thousands of middle-class Canadians will benefit from a tax reduction while the very wealthy will be targeted. In addition, we also remain committed to phasing out the rationalization inefficient fossil fuel subsidies that give fossil fuels an unfair advantage over cleaner solution. Our government has committed to this phase out by 2023. We know that eliminating inefficient fossil fuel subsidies and redoubling our focus on clean energy is a key step in building Canada's net zero economy by 2050 and a strong future for workers in the industry. Finally, we are no longer allowing expenditure-related oil, gas, and coal exploration and development to be renounced to flow through share investment for flow through shared agreement entered into after March 2023. Thank you so much, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Kitchener Centre.
Well, Mr. Speaker, in the limited time I have, I'm going to put to the side the mention from the Parliamentary Secretary about so-called inefficient fossil fuel subsidies, which is one way of saying how this government's going to continue to subsidize the very industry that's making these record-breaking profits. Instead, I'll focus on our point of alignment, and that is his mention of the Canada Recovery Dividend. As you heard from the Parliamentary Secretary, this is a measure that this government has already taken. They've done so with banks and life insurance companies already, recognizing that there was over-the-top profiteering happening there. We know the same thing is happening with oil and gas. As I mentioned earlier, $38 billion a year amongst the 5 largest companies alone. Why would we not, at this moment in time, in the midst of a climate crisis, when these companies are gouging Canadians at the pumps, why would we not apply that same Canada Recovery Dividend to them?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, our government remains committed to both fighting climate change and addressing tax fairness. We have already taken action to build a green economy and to ensure that all pay their fair share in the taxes. We have taken steps to close loopholes, combat tax evasion, and ensure that the wealthiest pay their fair share. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Well, before I close up here, I just want to thank everyone for, of course, wishing me a happy birthday. I got a lot of those today. But I also want